What's up, everybody? It's Realistic with Realistic Productions doing another tutorial for SoundOracle.net. And today we're going to do kind of a cool one. This is something that's constantly being brought up in trap music and pop music today. And what we're going to do is we're going to thicken vocals and get them to sound more like a synth or an instrument. And you hear this a lot on Travis Scott's music, a lot on Chris Brown's music. You kind of hear it just throughout music nowadays that people are blending this in, and we're going to use a couple different cool plugins and be able to get this stuff to sound really thick and really kind of synth like. All right, let's dive into Pro Tools. So I'm really excited about this one. It's definitely a trick that's been used quite a bit in the industry the last few years. Like I said, Travis Scott and Chris Brown used this quite a bit, and it just kind of reminds me almost like a guitar of how it thickens up their vocals. It almost seems like a little bit of distortion, and it also just seems detuned and just gives it a really cool effect. So I figured this would be a really useful one to use. And so I pulled up a song that I actually produced myself for an artist that I work with locally, and we just released it a couple weeks ago, actually. And so we used it in this song over the summer, so I figured this would be a good one to use. I'm not entirely sure of the exact plugins that Travis Scott and Chris Brown use, but I got a really strong feeling that I'm either using one that's really close to it or I'm using the exact one, because I've definitely been able to dial in a similar tone. So, like I always say, if you haven't already and you're capable of doing it, pull up your DAW and do this with me. You'll learn a lot more of this if you follow along versus trying to remember it later. And these tricks will work in any DAW. You don't have to be using Pro Tools to do this. So I'm just going to play it, and then I'm going to take away the effects so then you can hear how it sounded without the effects.
This isn't just some face in my bedroom with a thought, thinking we should tie the knot. Take my car and drive away from the place the devil lay.
And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it without the effects that I added onto it, so then you can hear of how it kind of sounded a little bit more plain.
Take my car and drive away from the place the devil lay.
So yeah, you can definitely hear that it thickens it up. So there's a couple things that I did here. One thing that I did was I threw a vocoder on it and duplicated the track, and then on the duplicated track I added the vocoder on it. So here's what it sounds like with the vocoder. Right, and so I'll show you if we minus out the vocoder. So I'll play it with the original track, and then I'll minus it out halfway through.
She's in my bedroom with a thought, thinking we should tie the knot. Take my car and drive away.
So that's the first thing that I did, and I'll kind of dive in and talk about what I did with that in a second here. But then the other thing that I did was I added Alter Boy, and Alter Boy is like a little voice manipulator, and I think it's a really cool one. And I have a feeling that this is a plugin that Chris Brown and Travis Scott's engineers are using, or they're using one that's really close to it. I'll start out and show you what it sounds like with it, and then I'll take it out and then put it back in again.
She's in my bedroom with a thought, thinking we should tie the knot. Take my car and drive away from the place.
Yeah, so I definitely think that's really close to what they're using, and I'll just kind of show you what I'm doing with that. Let's actually start with Alter Boy, because I think Alter Boy is one of the main ones that they're using, or something similar to it. So you got a couple little options for Alter Boy. It's actually pretty simple. It's made by Sound Toys. We have pitch, which is just gonna either lower or raise the pitch like you'd see on any pitch shift option. And then we have this formant parameter here, and this one's a little complicated to explain, but basically it's an EQ curve that constantly changes as you sing or speak into it. And if it's pitched more up, it's going to sound more feminine. And if it's pitched more down, it's going to sound more masculine. All right. And then we have our mode. And what our mode does is it's basically how it's going to drift the pitch here. So if it's on transpose, it's just going to shift the notes to the nearest note that it's trying to shift towards. Just a little bit more natural of all of them. And then we have our quantize, which is going to be a little bit more like auto-tune, where it's going to be more aggressive and more tight-fitting of just correcting notes. And then we have our robot note mode, which is going to just stick to one note all the way through. I haven't found too many uses for it. If I was into film, I would probably find more uses for it, but it just sticks to one note. And then we have our drive, which is basically distortion, just kind of a little bit more overdrive to it. And then our wet and dry mix of how much we want to blend it in with the original signal. And so what I usually do for Alter Boy is I have this at 100% because I actually have this on an aux track and I have this sent over here. So I'm not actually applying it to the original track. And I just do that because for me, visually, I can just manipulate it a little bit easier, but there's definitely nothing wrong with just throwing it right on the channel and then adjusting the wet and dry mix to see fitting. I think it's just a weird thing that I got going on that I like to do. So yeah, let me just show you some different things now that I went through each of the parameters. Let me show you what they can do and how they sound. And I'll probably switch to a different part of the song so we don't get sick of that part of the song.
I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute, the god of hope, burning witches for having marks, calling me weak for having scars.
Yep, so you could hear, pitch, it just turned it up or down, typical. And I'll show you with the formant.
I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute, the god of hope, burning witches for having marks.
And it's basically a pitch thing again, but it just kind of messes with the EQ too to get it to sound either masculine or feminine. If you link them together, it'll just put them to be the same on each side. So when you move, them, they'll be the same, and if they're linked together. So I usually don't use link because I like to just kind of switch it a little bit. It seems to be a little bit more stereo. And then I'll show you the difference here with our modes.
I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute, the god of hope, burning witches for having marks, calling me
I went back and forth between transpose and quantize just kind of show you the subtle difference. Quantize is again, it's really nice to get that auto-tune one. And I definitely like that sound. I chose for this one transpose one because since it wasn't perfectly on, it made it seem a little bit wider and stick out a little bit more. So that's why I went with that. And I'll show you the robot mode where it just sticks to one pitch.
I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute, the god of hope.
Yep, and then we got our drive over here.
I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute, the god.
And I do think this is one of the parameters that when Travis Scott and Chris Brown used this on their voice, I think this is one of the parameters that's being used quite aggressively because their stuff always sounds thick like a guitar almost. And then what I'm also going to do, I'm going to show you what just the signal sounds like by itself because I showed you what it sounded like blended in with the original track. I'll let you hear what it sounds like by itself.
I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute, the god of hope, burning witches for having marks, calling me weak for having scars. I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute, the god of hope, burning witches for having marks, calling me weak for having scars. Slinging dope, prostitute, the god of hope.
Yeah, so you can see it's pretty cool. It definitely adds some good texture to it. And then what I usually do then is I'll adjust the parameters and then I'll drop it down in volume so it's kind of just blended in. So the original source is going to be a little bit louder and then this is just kind of more in the background. So I definitely think it adds a lot of rich character to it. And typically I generally will drop it down by 12 because that's a full octave down, but there's definitely nothing wrong with dropping it down by a fifth if you wanted. It's just it gets a little tricky if it's moving between different chords and everything. It gets a little trickier, so I've just always went with 12 because it's a little bit more of a safe bet. Usually you don't have to worry about pitches clashing too much. So that's the altar boy part of it, and I'll show you the vocoder part of it. I definitely think that sometimes a vocoder is added into what they're doing musically, and I won't go too much into detail with it because vocoders could be like a hour-long tutorial, but I'll just kind of show you a little bit of what I'm doing in here. There's a lot of different vocoders that you can use. I know if you're a Reason user, they have a vocoder in there that's pretty nice. It just takes a little bit to set up in the back. You got to patch it in, but once it gets going, it sounds pretty good. Waves has another one that sounds pretty good, and I believe there's a stock one that comes with Ableton that's also pretty useful. I picked up this one by iZotope vocal synth. I'm not sure how many people in the industry use it. I just liked it because there was a lot of cool options with it. It's one of the only plugins where you can mix a vocoder, a polyvox, a computer vox, and a talk box all together, while also adding that auto-tune pitch correction thing to it. And I just thought it was pretty good, and I've always liked what I've heard from iZotope. So just kind of show you some different things with vocoder. Got to be careful with these because you definitely want to choose the right sound for vocoders. So I'll just kind of show you some different things. So what I'm doing there is just going through different oscillators, you know, whether it's like square, triangle, or saw waves going through. And so you can choose that so that it kind of just generates and it oscillates the signal that's being ran through it. And then we also have a lot of them vocoders will have options to do a little bit more of a smooth or hard tone to it. I stuck with vintage tone on it, but I'll show you the difference of those. Yeah, so I like the vintage one personally, but you know, it's all preference. You just kind of saw that it just kind of switched as far as what we were hearing more frequency wise. And then, of course, we're going to have a shift for to go up or down. Just choosing our scales. You know, basically just choosing how quickly the vocoder is going to adjust to vowel sounds in there. And then we have our contour, which is going to change the frequency and the focus of the vocoder. So this one, I'm not going to give too much advice on. I feel with the vocoder, you really should just dive in and be creative with it. That's what's so cool about vocoders is it really gives you an option to be really creative and come up with some new sounds. And if I gave you a lot of tips on it, it might kind of steer you in one direction. And I think that if you just dove into it with just having a fresh set of ears and eyes to it, that you'll definitely come up with some more sounds that are going to be really original sounding and be really kind of cool too. So, you know, those are, like I said, those are some options. So let's listen to this and let's listen to it without the processing, and then we'll add the processing in and just kind of see how that sounds.
I'm in Olympus slanging dough. to the God of hope. Burning witches for having marks, calling me weak for having scars. I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute the God of hope. Burning witches for having marks, calling me weak for having scars. I'm in Olympus slinging dope, prostitute the God of hope.
Yeah, so you could hear drastic difference. You know, it really changes it up, really thickens it up. I feel like it widens it out too, and just gives it that new modern sound that we're hearing in a lot of more modern contemporary R&B, hip hop, and trap music. And it's really been taking over the radio. So I figured this would be a really good trick to use. You can use it on a lot of things. Use it on background vocals. You know, it's gonna sound kind of cool. I'll show you an example here that I got it on. Without it, with it, you know, just kind of adds in some nice textures to it. You don't always have to use it for that Travis Scott sound. Again, I used it in the chorus as well for this song, and it really kind of added some nice texture to it. And it wasn't that Travis Scott or Chris Brown texture. I still used the same parameters, but I'll show you what it sounds like.
Don't believe in magic powers. Yo, I cannot make you famous. Don't believe in magic powers. Yo, I cannot make you famous. Don't believe in magic powers. Yo, I cannot make you famous. Everything I heard about you.
Just add some nice textures. I'll play it with the music then.
Don't believe in magic powers. Yo, I cannot make you famous. Everything I heard about you. If you wanna fuck them, please arrange it. Don't believe in magic powers.
Again, just really nice textures. And yeah, so I hope you got a lot out of this. I think this is such a dope trick to have. And, you know, have at it. Use this trick and go ahead and make some mainstream sounding music. So I hope that tutorial was useful. Hopefully you're able to get some modern techniques out of that. And basically what we did was we just pulled up a couple different effects things that kind of worked like vocoders, things that kind of work like harmonizers. We used Alter Boy, we used some cool vocoders, stuff like that to just really kind of thicken the stuff up, and it gave it a really cool modern sound. And like I always say, if you're liking these videos, please comment below. Let us know what kind of content you want to see in the future, and we'll do our best to deliver that to you. Oracle and I are always trying to give you the content that you're looking for. And you can find me on the web, realisticproductions.net. You can find me all over social media at Realistic Productions. If you're looking for the dopest sounds in the industry right now, the 808s that just really bump, if you're looking for some heavy kicks and some snares that just really cut through the mix, go to SoundOracle.net and you'll definitely find what you're looking for there. And you can find SoundOracle everywhere at SoundOracle. All right.